Welcome to the show, folks. This is John Rust on the Radio. The John Rust Show on Freedom 95, broadcasting at 9:50 a.m. and 95.9 FM on your radio dial all across central Indiana. And on podcasts on Apple, Amazon, iHeart, Spotify, and YouTube. If you are just tuning in for the very first time and would like to hear previous programs, just visit any of those podcast platforms to hear what a real conservative, a real genuine farmer has to say. I am a sixth-generation Hoosier farmer, me, John Rust. I am a deep red conservative in a state riddled with career politicians who pretend to be economically conservative, but are anything but. Indiana has a Republican supermajority in the state legislature, both houses, and a Republican governor, but we have some of the highest taxes and highest corresponding government spending and waste in the nation. My focus on this program is to shine the flashlight and raise the curtain on what these career politicians are doing to Hoosiers here in the state of Indiana. Today's focus is on sin taxes. What are sin taxes? Taxes the government says are taxes to discourage bad behavior. Folks, I'm a conservative. I will never, ever apologize. It is not any of government's darned business to be deciding what is good or bad in your personal life. I'm a Margaret Thatcher conservative. That means I know you're an adult. You are and you should be solely responsible for your own life choices. How do you want to contribute to life? I'm a farmer. I farmed all my life, helping feed over 20 million people every day. If you want to be an electrician, fantastic. If you want to be a school teacher, awesome. We all have a path in this lifetime, but Indiana state government feels differently. I believe in individual liberty. It's right there in the Declaration of Independence, written in 1776 by Thomas Jefferson. We believe in the right of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. A little side note on happiness. The right of life, liberty, and property is the foundational concept of English philosopher John Locke, whose work greatly influenced the writing of the Declaration of Independence. The pursuit of happiness is Jefferson's expression of what it means that property is not only physical property, and that is a key, and that's a very important point, folks. He used that term happiness because he was wanting to convey that every individual is entitled by God to pursue literally what makes you happy. What makes you happy in your life is your own choices, not the government's. Not the government to choose for you or to tax you differently from others. And that is a key, differently. Today, our intrusive state government ran by career politicians is choosing to directly tax what they feel is a sin. That is 100% contrary to the Declaration of Independence. The political class in Indiana has decided they are the king of England and will decide for you what is healthy and what behaviors to encourage or discourage. In essence, the government is choosing what makes government happy, raking in tax dollars for them, not for you. And the growing sin tax list keeps multiplying. Today's focus is on cigarette taxes here in Indiana. $2 a pack, wow. The typical Hoosier taxpayer pays around $10,000 in taxes per year. But if a smoker that smokes 2 packs a day, well, they get to pay in an additional $700 a year in taxes because the government feels you are bad, and so you have to pay even more. And it's not just cigarette taxes. Remember, Indiana already has the second highest state sales tax in the USA. So in addition to already the second highest sales tax, now we're up to $2.99 a pack. Wow, that's just crazy. A huge jump from the previous lower rank of 99.5 cents per pack. This recent tripling of the tax rate reflects a statewide effort to address a budget shortfall, but it was not really about cigarette consumption. It was about raising money. Previously, Indiana's tax rate was 99.5 cents per pack, ranking it much lower, around 39th in the nation. Now we are in the top 10 highest in the nation. Sin taxes in the U.S. date to the 18th century, beginning with a federal whiskey tax in 1791 to fund the new republic, and a later tobacco and alcohol taxes to generate revenue and discourage consumption. Early colonists also taxed luxury imports like wine and tobacco, and state-level taxes on these products emerged to help finance wars and address public health concerns. Over time, the list of taxed sinful items expanded to include gambling, sugary drinks, and other products deemed harmful to individuals and society. So if you go back in history, in 1791 there was a whiskey tax, the first major federal sin tax, and it was an excise tax on distilled spirits proposed by Alexander Hamilton to pay off Revolutionary War debts. This tax faced significant resistance from farmers in western Pennsylvania, leading to the Whiskey Rebellion. In the Civil War era, taxes on tobacco and alcohol were reinstituted to help finance the Union's effort during the Civil War. An evolution of tobacco taxes. Early state taxes. Iowa was the first to levy a state tax on cigarettes in 1921. All other 49 states had taxes on cigarettes by 1969. Indiana started our cigarette tax in 1947. Federal tobacco taxes have periodically increased to help fund government programs such as the Korean War in 1951 and again in 1983. So you'll see a thread there. Cigarette taxes were introduced to fund major wars where our nation was under threat. Today, it's not that. It is just about continuing to expand our state government. These taxes are not really used to stop smoking. They are used to rake in cash for state government. Smokers are an easy mark by these career politicians, but it's not just smokers. If they can tax cigarettes because they are bad, are they going to tax your Snickers bar? That could be considered bad. Or your can of Pepsi or Mountain Dew or Coca-Cola. Whatever the government today feels bad seems to change over time. I remember as a farmer in the 1980s when the government said eggs were very bad for you. They said that the cholesterol in eggs were a reason you should not consume eggs at all. Well, the science has changed on that considerably, and now eggs are rightfully considered a wonder food. Can you imagine had government introduced a specific egg tax because of cholesterol? They were probably close to. The problem on these sin taxes is the list of what are sins keeps expanding. Look at sugary drinks and certain other quote-unquote unhealthy foods, gambling and lotteries, tanning salons, and they're taxing e-cigarettes and vaping products. So tell me, if tobacco is being taxed to stop it, why are we taxing something that helps people stop smoking? On sugary drink taxes, Philadelphia taxes soda through what's called the Philadelphia Beverage Tax, which is a 1.5 cent per ounce tax on sweetened beverages. So on a 12-ounce can of Mountain Dew or Pepsi, you're going to be paying 18 cents a can in tax, folks. Just wait till the Indiana GOP does that. I'm raising the alarm on this now because that is what is next on their list. We have the fourth highest gasoline tax in the country, and now they are wanting an additional tax via tolls on every square mile of Indiana interstates. We have to say no. We have to say no to these career politicians who keep feeding big state government instead of looking out for the economic welfare of taxpayers here in our state. This is from the Kiplinger letter. 10 states with the highest gasoline tax in 2025. It says, skip the fill-up in those states with the highest gas taxes to save money on your next road trip. Sometimes crossing state lines is all it takes to spend less. Well, that is specifically one of the reasons Governor Braun says we need to bring tolls to the Indiana interstates is because truckers and folks traveling across our state are not stopping here. Well, they're not stopping here because we already have ultra-high gasoline taxes. Again, the fourth highest in the nation. It's crazy. And so they're saying, well, if you don't pay for the gasoline tax, we're going to get you with a toll. What's crazy about all this, and what's not being talked about by anyone else, is our already ridiculously high sales tax. Indiana sales tax is the second highest in the nation. Let me repeat that. Indiana sales tax is already the second highest in the nation, 7%. We are tied with Mississippi, Rhode Island, and Tennessee at the 7% rate, just behind California at 7.25%. Why on earth is Indiana, a deep red state, only 0.25% less than California? That is insanity. That is what we get with these career politicians. They are turning Indiana blue. We do not want to be like California. We want to be Indiana. We should have low gasoline taxes here. We should have a much lower sales tax. You know, the answer is not to just keep growing government. The answer is to actually cut government. We should absolutely be reducing government spending here in our state to pre-COVID levels. That's a given. You know, from this article from the Kiplinger letter, this is from Gabriela Cruz Martinez. It was published on May 1st, 2025. Indiana, again, is the fourth highest gasoline tax in the country. We have a 56.1 cent per gallon tax on gasoline. You know, if you count in additional state taxes, Indiana gas tax now totals 56.1 cents per gallon, according to the Tax Foundation. Folks, these career politicians, again, I keep saying this, but it's the absolute truth. Career politicians are destroying our state. You know, when people like Jim Banks are clinking champagne glasses with Mark Zuckerberg in D.C. while we get all these data centers in, and which result in all these massive electric rate increases that Hoosiers are facing, a high gasoline tax, the second highest sales tax in the country, which is insane for a red state. Again, it's insanity. What on earth are they doing? So folks, we're out of time on this segment. But when we come back, if you earned $1 million every single day since 1 AD, when Jesus Christ was born, guess how much money you would have today and what percentage that would be of the national debt. This is John Rust on Rust on the Radio, the John Rust Show on Freedom 95. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after this short commercial break. Welcome back to the show, folks. This is John Rust on the Radio on Freedom 95, 950 AM and 95.9 FM on your radio dial. Today we are in the year 2025, AD, Anno Domini, which is Latin for Year of Our Lord. The year 1 AD is the first year of the Gregorian calendar era, which counts years forward from the birth of Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. The Gregorian calendar is an internationally accepted solar calendar established by Pope Gregory XIII in 1582 to correct errors in the Julian calendar. But there's an interesting side note on the Julian calendar that I think you'll be very interested in. All egg farmers in the USA are required by law to stamp the Julian calendar date on the end of our egg cartons. For egg farmers, that Julian date is the actual date the eggs were packed into the egg cartons. The Julian calendar date on the end of an egg carton is a 3-digit code. The calendar starts obviously on January 1st, date 001, the first day of the year. The last day of the year, 365, is the 365th day of the year, which would be December 31st. February 1st would be Julian date 032, or the 32nd day of the year. Today's date is September 6th, so the Julian date for today's show is 249, or the 249th day of the year. This date is stamped on the end of every egg carton commercially produced in the United States. It's right next to the sell-by date on the end of your carton. All this talk on calendars is how I'm trying to put our debt, our nation's debt, into perspective. Jim Banks and Todd Young and the entire GOP Indiana congressional delegation just voted for trillions of dollars of new government debt. The scope of this debt is very hard to fathom. To try to put that national debt in perspective and talking about calendars, think of it this way. If you earned $1 million every day since 1 AD, since the birth of Jesus, you'd have about $740 billion, with a B, billion dollars today. Guess what? That would only be 2% of the national debt. Folks, when Jim Banks and Todd Young were sworn into Congress in 2017, your share as a taxpayer of the nation's debt was around $170,000. Today is over $323,000. This printing of money, this huge national debt, it is causing this massive inflation. This is from Jennifer Harper Brown on Twitter. My husband and I were talking last night about how a 12-pack of soft drinks is $9 now, and how in 2020 I used to buy them 4 for $10. I decided to go to my Walmart app and see what I was paying for a random grocery order. In January 2020, I paid $70.20 for 30 items. I added all of them to the cart again and repurchased them today. Today, those same 30 items were $165.42. And that correlates exactly to what our national debt was when Jim Banks and Todd Young were sworn in, when it was $170,000 per taxpayer to $323,000 today. It correlates to inflation exactly. These establishment career politicians are our problem, folks. Pure and simple. On this grocery bill, that's a $95.22 price increase in just 4 years' time. That's 135% inflation. We can't go on living like this. I can't be the only one who feels this way. Well, Jennifer, we all feel this way. We have all been so let down by these career politicians in Washington who keep printing more and more government debt. We have no fiscal conservatives in the Republican Party in the state of Indiana serving us in Washington. None, not one. Every single one of them, again, voted for, just recently, trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars of new debt. Just look what price increases have been over just the last 5 years. This is from Charlie Bolello on Twitter. New cars up 21%. Family health insurance up 24%. Food away from home, 30%. Used cars, 32.9%. Electricity, up 37.8%. Here in Indiana, we just had a 9% average statewide increase for electricity last year. This year, it's 17%. And we talked in last week's episode how all these data centers are driving up the electricity rates so radically here in Indiana. But it keeps going. Transportation, up 43%. Gasoline up 43%, home prices up 51%, gas utilities up 56%, fuel oil up 57%, auto insurance up 60%. Folks, it is just natural that the more and more money our government prints, the less value each dollar will have. That is just the law of economics. There is no way around that. Will Tanner wrote this on Twitter. In 1950, an ounce of gold was still worth $35. And we're going to put that in perspective. In 1950, there's an example of a house that sold for $8,000. Today, the asking price for that house is $1.1 million. So as Will says, in 1950, an ounce of gold was worth $35. So this house was worth 228.5 ounces of gold in 1950. Gold is around $3,380 an ounce today. So this house would be worth $772,000 just if based on what the gold price is. However, there are evil forces in the housing market, and it's more than just what government inflation is doing to cause skyrocketing house prices. Listen to this. This is from Wall Street Apes. Again, it's about BlackRock. And remember, BlackRock has funded both Jim Banks and Todd Young, our Indiana senators. Well, Jim Banks claims to be from Indiana, but he actually lives in Virginia. But that's going to be another show someday. We'll talk about that in the future. So this is what BlackRock is up to and why they are purchasing United States senators to do their bidding. Listen to this. BlackRock and private equity firms are buying up entire new housing developments, sometimes at 500 units a pop. Again, this is from Wall Street Apes. They'll buy the houses at $300,000 per home. They won't sell them right away. They'll keep the area looking like a construction zone for a year. Let's say there are 3 different models of homes in that community they bought. Then a year later, they'll sell 3 of those houses that they bought for $300,000 to themselves in another fund for $700,000. That creates 3 comps, comparable prices in the neighborhood. When they're all done, they will each have these models, and now the entire neighborhood, each house is valued at $700,000. And what's BlackRock doing with these? They're turning them into rentals. You can't buy them, you have to rent them. So simultaneously, they're going to have 2.5 times value on their portfolio to borrow against. Again, this is from Wall Street Apes. And this is his direct quote. Every American in that community was just priced out of everything around that community. That's exactly what's happening nationwide. And why is that? These career politicians, they are on the take and they are allowing it to happen. It's what's happening here in the state of Indiana. So it's not just prices going up to where people have been priced out of buying a new home. How the Indiana GOP, the establishment GOP, the career politician GOP, has completely priced out of reach the American dream for working Hoosiers because they don't care about working Hoosiers. They don't care about taxpayers. They only care about their own careers. Remember, just a couple weeks ago, we talked about this in a previous episode. 81% of Hoosiers are even banned from running for political office in our state. Todd Rokita, Diego Morales, they all work together to make sure that the laws used to keep ordinary Hoosiers from running for office, like myself, so that you can't run for office. But I'm here to tell you, we have to all stand up. They have all these Byzantine regulations to keep you out, but there's ways around it. Number 1, again, vote in your Republican primary. Most people don't because we unfortunately naively trust our elected officials to choose conservative candidates for us. I used to think that. As I found out, that is absolute hogwash. That's how we get these people like Jim Banks and Todd Young, who are nowhere near anywhere conservative. They are all ultra-liberal spenders. They're all big spenders. And sadly, the consequence of all this big spending is this massive inflation that we're seeing on everything. Everything from the price of a value meal at McDonald's to what a dozen eggs cost, to what a pound of hamburger costs, to what a 12-pack of pop costs. I mean, just go to Walmart, go to Kroger, walk around the aisles, and it is obvious to you and me, but the career politicians, they don't care. Again, all they care about is their careers and lying through their teeth when they're in Indiana saying, oh, I'm conservative. Well, it's hogwash. They are absolutely not conservative. Indiana's a red state, but we certainly do not have elected conservatives anywhere, not one. You can't be raising taxes, increasing government spending, and adding trillions of dollars to the nation's debt and pretend to be conservative. Sorry, no. You know, we just have to get back to fiscal responsibility. And you can't do that if you're only concerned about your career in Washington. Because, folks, there is so much wrong. You know, again, it all boils back to inflation, and it all boils back down to government bureaucrats and government career politicians who have zero idea of what fiscal responsibility is. As a farmer, I'm here to tell you, I understand 100% what fiscal responsibility means. I think at this point you have to say, hey, get rid of all career politicians and get more farmers elected. So folks, we're out of time for this segment, but when we come back, we're going to talk about how the Indiana GOP has bought into hook, line, and sinker the Green New Deal scam. This is John Rust on Rust on the Radio. We will be right back. Welcome back, folks. This is John Rust on the Radio on Freedom 95. Before the break, we were getting into how the Indiana GOP has bought into hook, line, and sinker the Green New Deal scam. You know, folks, one of my favorite political leaders this world has ever known is Margaret Thatcher. This is what she has to say on the subject of the Green New Deal. Quote, "The doomster's favorite subject today is climate change. This has a number of attractions for them. First, the science is extremely obscure, so they cannot easily be proved wrong. Second, since clearly no plan to alter climate could be considered on anything but a global scale, it provides a marvelous excuse for worldwide supranational socialism." Again, this is from Margaret Thatcher. Why is this such an important topic? Well, you hear that the polar bears are disappearing. Actually, there are more polar bears now than ever recorded. You hear a lot about the Arctic ice caps melting. Well, listen to this. This is from Tony Heller on Twitter. Antarctic sea ice extent is within 3% of what it was in 1986, and a lot higher than what it was in 1966. Legacy media wants people to believe normal conditions are some sort of emergency. And again, from Tony Keller, Arctic sea ice extent has actually increased 22% over the past 13 years. But you won't see that being reported by the legacy media. This is from the Register. "Arctic ice refuses to melt as ordered" is the headline. It says there's something rotten north of Denmark. This was published on February 15th, 2008. Just a few weeks ago, predictions of Arctic ice collapse were buzzing all over the internet. Some scientists were predicting that the North Pole may be ice-free for the first time this summer. Others predicted that the entire polar ice cap would disappear this summer. And how does this relate directly to what utility prices are doing here in the state of Indiana for electricity? It is because the Indiana GOP has bought into the quote-unquote fact, which is not really a fact, that carbon is somehow bad. Listen to this. MIT climate scientist Dr. Richard Lindzen says, "Believing CO2 controls the climate is pretty much believing in magic." And this is a direct quote by Dr. Lindzen. "In this complex multi-factor system, what is the likelihood of the climate, which itself consists in many variables and not just globally average temperature anomaly, is controlled by this 2% perturbation in a single variable? Believing this is pretty close to believing in magic. Instead, you are told that this is believing in science, quote unquote. Such a claim should be a tip-off that something is amiss. After all, science is a mode of inquiry rather than a belief structure." This is Dr. Richard Lindzen, MIT scientist, published in April of 2017. And what he was saying there is that the global warming myth is a belief system. It is actually not science-based, according to him. It's a new religion. You know, if you look at a lot of the people that believe in man-made climate change or global warming, they're either in it, on the scam because they're on the take because they're making a lot of money off of it, like Al Gore, for instance, or they're folks that are just severely delusioned, like Greta Thunberg. Climate is not a religion. It should be a science, and you have to recognize, point of fact, we have many, 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 many more polar bears today than we did just 20 or 30 years ago. Thousands and thousands more. Remember, Al Gore, whose net worth has went up hundreds of millions of dollars based on the climate scam, predicted that polar bears would disappear from the face of the earth. I did a whole episode on that just a few weeks ago. No, polar bears are just fine. So this is from Peter Clack. "Renewable energy from wind turbines and solar arrays may be the costliest misjudgment in human history. Coal, oil, and gas are still providing around 85% of global energy, and coal production is at record levels. Trillions, with a T, trillions of dollars have been spent on the renewables experiment, much of it in the form of government subsidies, yet it provides less than 15% of the world energy, half of which was from established hydro, meaning dams, that were already in place anyhow. And why are they doing all these windmills and solar farms? Well, it's because they call CO2 a pollutant. And this is another quote from Richard Linsden. This is in 2020. He says, to call CO2, carbon dioxide, a pollutant is a corruption of the English language. Plants do not call it a pollutant. They call it dinner. Folks, everything green on our planet needs carbon to survive. Pure and simple. You and I both breathe out 2 pounds of carbon dioxide every day. 2 pounds of carbon. Carbon is a wonderful thing. There is no reason whatsoever for the Indiana GOP to have this war on coal. We should be building new coal-powered power plants right now. Full stop. Today. We need to be building new coal-powered power plants today. Yes, nuclear may be a wonderful thing, but remember what I talked about in last week's episode on nuclear energy. Remember there was an Indianapolis Star article about Marble Hill, which is down in Madison, Indiana, and my family's egg farm, we got to pay for that too, just like every other taxpayer in Indiana. The issue on nuclear is it is extremely expensive and it doesn't always work out. Just look at Marble Hill. So if you research that, just search for nuclear power lays an egg. That was an Indianapolis Star article on that. That's why early on I got some skepticism on, the next wonderful thing in terms of power. We have to be careful. Remember, Indiana mines coal. We produce so much coal in Indiana. Why aren't we using that? It is economical. It is the cheapest form of electricity out there. Why on earth are we forcing Hoosiers to pay higher and higher electricity costs because the Indiana GOP doesn't like coal? I love coal. Coal is a wonderful, wonderful thing. Full stop. Again, there is absolutely no reason to be against coal-powered plants. With the technology today, it is extremely clean. If you see a new coal-powered plant and see it in operation in the United States, all you see is water vapor being harmlessly released into the atmosphere. There is no smoke coming out. It is water vapor. Why is the GOP pushing solar? Well, they want the subsidies. They want the Green New Deal scam. Remember Erin Hounshin in the 9th District, our Congress lady down there. She was hesitant about cutting out the Green New Deal scam in Congress because she felt the subsidies for solar farms are worth pursuing and worth keeping. No. Listen to what's happening in Germany. It says, German solar industry warns against ending subsidies after minister proposes cuts. This is on Reuters, published August 12, 2025. Again, German solar industry warns against ending subsidies because without the subsidies, it is not economically feasible. The subsidies mean you and I are having to pay for someone else's electricity. And look at what Indiana is doing with all these wind turbines. Listen to this. Wind turbines are like strippers. They stop working when you stop throwing money at them. It's kind of like politicians too. If you're not cutting them a campaign check, they ain't going to listen to you. This is from Wide Awake Media. Climate zealot claims it is immoral and selfish to have children due to the amount of carbon they will emit over their lifetimes. They are saying the quiet part out loud. They are anti-human. If you believe in climate change, if you follow that religion through to its point, human beings are bad. I don't believe human beings are bad. I think human beings are wonderful. This is a direct quote again from Wide Awake Media. Every single child in an industrial country like ours is around 500 tons of carbon over their lifetime. That is the equivalent of over 1,000 years of electricity for a household. That's clown world. Baloney. I just don't buy into the premise of that. Carbon is not bad, and we do not have the emergency everyone's talking about. This is from Tony Heller on Twitter. 2 billion tons of new snow fell on Greenland yesterday in the middle of August. You won't hear that from the mainstream media. Again, just last month, over 2 billion tons of new snow fell on Greenland. 2 billion, with a B, billion tons of snow. We got told reliably by the Green New Deal scammers that there would be no more snow in Greenland, and they're getting hammered with snow. So again, carbon is not a bad thing, but they blame it all on carbon, and they blame it on global warming when it's not happening. Germany's latest masterpiece, this is from newstart_2024 on Twitter. Germany's latest masterpiece, the sun tax. First, they begged citizens to go solar, offering cash, tax breaks, and feed-in tariffs. Germans delivered, turning rooftops into power plants. Now, surprise, that sunlight isn't free. Germany is slapping solar users with a literal sun tax. So again, they're now taxing the sun, they're taxing carbon. They just want to tax everything. Folks, we're out of time for this segment, but when we come back, we will get right back into the Green New Deal scam. This is John Rust on the Radio. Welcome back, folks. This is John Rust on the Radio, the John Rust Show on Freedom 95, broadcasting all across our beautiful fruited plain of our beautiful state of Indiana. So we were talking about carbon. So here's a simple fact for you folks. If carbon dioxide is so bad for the planet, why do greenhouse growers buy CO2 generators to double plant growth all over the planet? Carbon's supposed to be bad, but greenhouses are literally pumping it into their greenhouses to feed their plants. And you hear all this talk about carbon sequestration. Well, in the end, follow the money. Guess who is backing a company now producing butter with no animals, no plants, and no oils? It's made from carbon. Bill Gates. This company is working with restaurants, bakeries, and food suppliers to incorporate their carbon-made butter. Mainstream media reports it has the blessing and backing of Bill Gates. Always follow the money, folks. And it's the same with what we hear on all these electric buses. This is from WKCRG TV. Dateline, Iowa City. Iowa City's entire electric bus fleet is out of commission, and the city doesn't know when the electric buses might be running again. It's because the company that made the city's buses filed for bankruptcy, and now the city can't get parts for needed repairs. In 2023, Iowa City's electric bus vendor, Proterra, filed for bankruptcy, and the company's transit line was later bought out by Phoenix EV. Since Proterra went bankrupt, Iowa City hasn't been able to do any repairs to its electric buses. So are electric buses heaven? No. It's Iowa, and they unfortunately went down the Green New Deal scam for some electric buses that were paid for with subsidies that a lot of Republicans voted for. This is why we have to stop this completely. We have to nip it in the bud, root it out from the root. The consequences of not doing so are very dire. Look what's happening in the United Kingdom. This is from Birmingham Live. All UK households told to sleep downstairs from Wednesday onwards. This is because in Britain, electricity is astronomically expensive and it is basically rationed. That is what's coming to Indiana, folks. Britain has went down the rat hole of the Green New Deal scam far worse than what the United States has. But unfortunately, the Indiana GOP is still continuing to go down that rat hole. And why are they going down that rat hole? This is from Chris Martz. This is some absolutely terrifying news about Glacier National Park. The hot, dry seasons of the past few years have caused rapid disintegration of glaciers in Glacier National Park, Montana. If this rapid retreat should continue, the glacier would almost disappear in another 25 years. Oh, wait a second. This was published on December 29th, 1923, over 100 years ago. So this is from that article. Again, if this rapid retreat should continue, the professor added, the glacier would be almost gone in 25 years. And so it's always the sky is falling predictions that never come true that are leading to choices being made for you by government that negatively affects your life. This is from Xcel Energy. Quote unquote, encouraging customers to conserve electricity. And this, folks, is so the glaciers don't melt and the polar bears don't die off. But remember, polar bears are doing just fine. So this is from Xcel Energy. Dear customer, extremely hot temperatures and high electricity demands are putting stress on the power grid today. We are encouraging customers to please conserve electricity now until 10 p.m. to help avoid the need for controlled rotating power outages, which would only be used as a last resort. These power companies, they're recommending turning up your thermostats in the summer to 78 degrees and when you're away from home to 85 degrees. Just imagine what they're going to do this winter, folks. We're going to be freezing our you-know-what off, thanks to the Green New Deal scam. It is all about control. This is from Freedom Research on Twitter. Carbon quotas aren't about climate. They're about conditioning you to accept less. Less food, less freedom, less future. The elites will feast, and you'll be told it's sustainable. Refuse the diet of control. And this is directly talking about where the United Kingdom is now trialing a personal CO2 allowance, dividing the nation's emissions into daily quotas per person to enforce net zero. When you hear net zero, that's the amount of electricity you will be allowed to use in the future is zero. This is from newstart_2024 on Twitter. The World Economic Forum's disturbing vision. Your appliances, your electric vehicle will be remotely controlled for your own good, of course. The World Economic Forum admitted what skeptics have warned about for years. The smart grid isn't about efficiency, it's about your control. What they're really saying, your smart devices, your smart thermostats, your electric vehicles will be hijacked during emergencies. They call it demand management. What that means is rationing. The state will be deciding when you are allowed to use energy, not you. Have you heard about bidirectional charging? It means your electric vehicle battery isn't yours. It's a grid resource they'll drain without asking if they need it for someone else, who perhaps has a lower carbon footprint than you do. I do not believe we should be treating your car as a public utility. We certainly do that in Indiana with the high gas taxes and now tolls coming everywhere. But it is the future the World Economic Forum wants. A world where your compliance isn't requested, It's automated. It's controlled by these huge data centers that you're being forced to subsidize. Again, it is all this baloney being put out, how there's climate change when there really hasn't been. Here's another interesting point from Tony Heller. Ancient tree stumps found under a glacier in southeast Iceland are confirmed to be roughly 3,000 years old. The remarkably well-preserved stumps were part of a massive forest that disappeared after a long period of a warm climate. So yes, there is climate change, but you can't say we have to hold climate static. It will always be changing. Fundamentally, folks, taxing people into poverty is not going to change the weather. But the quackery from the left on this, it's just mind-blowing. Listen to this. This is from What's Up With That on Twitter. Net zero nutters suggest a plague of ticks whose bite leads to a potentially fatal red meat allergy. This is serious, folks. Academics at Western Michigan University are pushing a bizarre net zero scheme, deliberately spreading Lone Star ticks to induce alpha-gal syndrome, AGS, a potentially fatal allergy to red meat. They claim it's morally obligatory and a moral bioenhancer to cut emissions from meat consumption. Never mind that AGS can cause severe reactions, including death. This nonsense even targets dairy, candy, and some medicines, all in the name of climate virtues. The paper's authors, ethics professor Parker Crutchfield and Blake Harith, suggest genetically editing ticks to amplify this plague, and it's been published in the journal Bioethics. Once again, this is from What's Up With That on Twitter. Wow. These net zero fanatics ignore the human cost because they don't care about humans. They are promoting a strategy that will worsen public health while pushing their vegan agenda. It's a stark reminder of how far climate extremism can go. So folks, we're out of time on this segment, but thank you so much for listening. I think it's been an interesting dialogue on how our state keeps raising taxes for reasons that are not what are stated. Do they really care about our health? No, they're going to keep taxing cigarettes more and more. Do they really care about your right to drive a car? No, they're going to keep raising Indiana's already astronomical gas tax higher and higher. And keep adding tolls. Now tolls are coming to every mile of Indiana interstate. But folks, I am going to keep shining the light. I'm going to keep raising the curtain. We have to do what's right. I'm going to close this program with my father's favorite Bible verse, Psalm 118, verse 24. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. This is John Rust, your friend and farmer on Freedom 95. Rust on the Radio, the John Rust Show, broadcasting at 9:50 a.m. and 95.9 FM on your radio dial. I will see you all again next week on the radio. Have a fantastic day.